The ability to recognize chord progressions can help you master any musical task: composing, arranging, performing, notating, transcribing, and more. Berklee professor Roberta Radley shows you a step-by-step approach, starting with the bass line to help you break down the process, internalize the music, then identify the elements of the progression. With Radley's guidance, you'll learn to listen more analytically, then apply this knowledge to all of your projects. And let's get right to it. This is When Music Works, with your host Matt Marvulio, Dean of Professional Performance at Berklee College of Music.
Hi Roberta, welcome.
Thank you, Matt.
So today we're going to learn how to hear some changes.
We're going to try.
How long does it take?
Takes a long time. I hope you don't have any plans for the rest of the week.
It's a lifelong kind of endeavor.
Definitely.
Tell us about the course. What is it about?
The course is designed for students that have had some experience with ear training. They're not bad in terms of hearing melodic or rhythmic phrases, but they're a bit stymied when it comes to hearing chord progressions because there's so much sound going on. It can be cluttersome, and how do you begin delving into all of that sound? The students also have a fair amount of theoretical background as to understanding about the chords.
So you expect them to have some theory?
I do.
Where they know the nomenclature of what a C major seventh is and how to write it out and do those kinds of things?
Yes. Most of the students have probably covered up through secondary dominant harmony, and also certainly know how to construct seventh chords. They might know about tensions. Typically their brains are way ahead of their ears in terms of understanding chords.
And how is hearing the changes different from hearing melodies or hearing rhythms? Is it a more complex kind of procedure or skill set?
I think so. I think mainly because there are so many notes going on at the same time that students often get disorganized very quickly and are listening for everything at the same time rather than breaking down the process into steps.
And what's the first step?
The first step for me, I recommend, is to hear the bass line and to hear that as a tonal melody, not as a series of isolated intervals.
So no matter what your instrument is, if you're a melody player or a rhythm player, you suggest go right to the bass line?
I think so. Of course, there are other approaches, but most students find that hearing from the bottom up is the easiest way to begin.
How did you get interested in hearing the changes? Was it something that was always easy for you to do and you want everybody else to do it, or did you have some difficulties with it?
Frankly, I had a lot of difficulty with it. So I was my own best student as far as developing the approaches I've taken to help hear the chord progression.
Did it take you a long time to get these skills happening, or?
A very long time. In
Very
fact,
long time.
I'm still learning.
Yeah, and as new sounds come up, you have to shed them, see what they are.
That's right. The vocabulary changes along the way, given the various styles of music.
I know as an ear training teacher, and I taught ear training years ago, one aspect of teaching that we all recommend is to internalize the music. What do you mean by that? What is your take on that when you ask somebody to internalize it?
Typically, if someone can sing the sound, I think that's one direct way of internalizing the music. I suggest that students not only approach hearing the changes as a dictation experience, but to be very active in singing the various elements of the chord progression, singing the bass line, singing up the arpeggio of the chords.
All right. So maybe a good place to start is even starting to sing. I know when I sing, I sound like a hound dog. And I'm sure there's a lot of students out there that if you just don't do it, the equipment isn't there, and you have to get used to really just belting some things out and getting accustomed to hearing yourself sing.
That's right. Now, a lot of these students, again, have already had a lot of experience with hearing melodies and singing melodies.
Right. Do you have a step-by-step process that we're going to go through
I
the
do.
course?
I do.
What's it like?
I first recommend that students listen to the bass line.
Mm-hmm.
The second step would be for them to pause a moment and think about the possible chords that bass line is going to outline.
And it's the process of elimination, pretty much.
That's right, that's right. Rather than picking from an endless set of possibilities, very often your choices are amongst 2 or 3 options. Mm-hmm. I highly recommend that students work within very limited possibilities of chord vocabulary. For example, start with in the key sound, diatonic sound, and gradually increase the vocabulary from there. I also recommend that students be able to sing chord arpeggios. Listening for what the third of the chord is often enough to give you the answer.
Right.
One last approach that I find very helpful is for students to reference the key, not the individual root of the chord of the moment, to determine what the chord is.
That's very important.
It is. It gives the student a chance to think ahead as to what notes they might be hearing.
So you can be listening for the tonic sound through the changes, or a dominant sound through the changes, and even holding the note through the changes.
That's right.
See how long it lasts, and then see if you...
It gives a horizontal approach to listening to chords, and you figure the chord progression is moving along as a horizontal experience.
Sure. Definitely. Well, why don't we see if we can hear these changes?
Great.
Let's get started.
Let's get started. Remember, the first thing is to get the sound of the key in your ear before we do anything. 1, do. There's a lot going on, so let's take the first step and start with the bass line. Our goal is to try and hear that bass line as a tonal melody, not a set of isolated intervals connected. Much like one of those connect the dot pictures that you don't find out what the picture is until you finish connecting the dots. Rather, let's keep the tonic, let's keep the do in our ear and try and hear this melody, this bass line, as a tonal phrase. Let's try it again where we sing along with it to internalize the melody. Again, here's your tonic. La, 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 la. La, 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 la. La, 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 la. La, 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 la. Simply singing along la la isn't going to give us the answer. So we need to translate that sound into a system, whether we use the movable do solfege system, do, re, mi, or numbers, 1, 2, 3. This is how we get the translation going and get the answer down on the page. Let's just try the first few notes of the bass line this way. Let's listen first, and then let's try and sing it back with numbers. One, two, three, 3, 6. Now when stepwise motion occurs, it's the easiest. Perhaps you had a little bit of difficulty when we had the leap from 3 to 6. Practice and experience will help you through those situations. Remember, you can't get all the answers at the same time. You might have to take this 9-bar phrase and break it up into smaller phrases. Again, with experience, you'll be able to maintain longer and longer phrases. Let's try the whole example now. This time, let's try using the movable do solfege system. Again, remind yourself of the key. Do, re, mi, mi, la, so, fa, mi, re, so, do, fa, ti, mi, la, ti, do. Notice at one point I had to adjust the register of my singing because I couldn't sing as low as that low re. This is something you'll often have to do when you're listening to real bass lines. The range of a bass line is often out of the range of your vocal register. It's my suggestion that you get lots of experience hearing and singing bass lines. You might take lead sheets and simply sing from the lead sheet the root motion of the chord progression. The more experience you get, the more you'll find how many songs contain the same kinds of chord progressions over and over. Through experience, you'll start to become very familiar and memorize popular chord progressions. Now that we have the bass line, it's time for the brain to get to work. You have a lot of theoretical information in your head. Let's use that to help us hear the chords. At this point, our vocabulary is limited to root position, diatonic triads or seventh chords, the possibility of the 1, 4, or 5 triad in inverted position, or secondary dominance. That's a lot in itself to begin with. Let's zoom in on a couple of examples of the bass line. If we look at the second measure, those 2 E's present a few possibilities. The possibility of an E minor triad, the possibility of root position E minor 7, perhaps the inversion of C over E, and And finally, the possibility of the secondary dominant E7. It's very possible that the second E might represent a secondary dominant because of the root motion of a fifth that follows the E. I'm unlikely to think that second E is a C over E chord because of that leap. In most cases, an inversion will involve stepwise motion from the previous bass note and the following bass note. If we take a look at the last two measures of the progression, A, B, C, or La, Ti, Do, it's unlikely that the A would represent a secondary dominant because there is no root motion down a fifth following it. I'm thinking possibly the B might represent the inversion of G over B because of the stepwise connection that occurs from the A to the C. When we get to the C in the bass, most likely I'm thinking it might be a C triad or a C major 7. Now the real work begins, where our ears have to make the final decision as to what we heard in the chord progression. Let's first start with considering what sounds in the key and what sounds out of the key. Remember to refresh your memory of what the key sounds like before we take this step. This time, don't worry about whether you're hearing minor chords, dominant chords, inversions. Just consider whether you're hearing the sound in or out of the key. I'll give you a hint. Most of the sounds you're hearing today are in the key. Put a check mark over those areas that sound out of the key. Let's try it. Sounds pretty much like it's staying in the key. Now there's a surprise for you. Maybe. In fact, there were 3 options of non-diatonic sound. Remember our list of vocabulary possibilities. If you hear something out of the key, it can only be a secondary dominant at this point. In the second measure, one of those occurred. We had the 3 minor 7 moving to a secondary dominant, 5/7 of 6. And this ties in with your theoretical knowledge that when we have root motion down a fifth, it's a possibility of a secondary dominant. Sometimes I will refer to the secondary dominant by its diatonic bass note name. Rather than saying E7 is 5/7 of 6, I might simply call it 3/7. This way it keeps my ear and brain more connected to the one reference of the key rather than the isolated target moments of the secondary dominant. In the fifth measure, we were very surprised to hear that D minor 7, G7 sus to C did not occur. In fact, D7, another secondary dominant, 5/7 of 5, or again I might refer to it as 2/7, occurred instead. To my ears, this was the most obvious place where a non-diatonic sound occurred. I was so expecting D minor 7 that the surprise of something else happening instead triggered off the possibility that it might be another secondary dominant. If we move to the 7th measure, we have one more instance of a non-diatonic sound. Once again, it's a secondary dominant, 5/7 of 6, or 3/7, moving as expected to its target, 6 minor. Here's something else we can try to help us hear what the chord quality is. In many cases, if we determine what the third of the chord is, we have enough of an answer at that point. For example, if we're trying to determine whether it's 3 minor 7 or 3/7, if we hear a major third, we know it must be the secondary dominant. Let me show you. Here's your root, I sing up to the third. It's a minor third. Here's the root, I sing up to the third. It's a major third. Now, this vertical approach is only practical when you're moving through a slow chord progression, or when you isolate one chord here or there in the progression to determine the quality of the third. Imagine trying to do something at this tempo. La, 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 la. You probably would already know the answer to be that quick. Let's zoom in once again on the 2nd measure, where we have 2 3 chords. I'm not sure whether that's major or minor, so let me try. La, la, minor third. I think I'm right. Let me try the opposite. Let me sing the wrong answer. Let me sing up a major third. La, la. Now let me do that at the same time I play the chord. La, la. That clash of sound is sometimes a more obvious answer that the chord was minor and not major. Let's go to the 5th measure, where we had the D7 move to the G7 sus. I'm so sure it's D minor. La, la. Let's check it out. La, la. Let me try the major third. La, la. And in fact, that's what it is. Remember earlier you were suspicious that that chord was not in the key. We have this other approach to double check that in fact it was a secondary dominant because of the major third that occurred above the root. After you have the answer to the progression, this might be a good exercise to sing through. In other words, at a slower tempo, singing from the root up to the third of the chord. Let's just try it with the first few measures. Root up to the third, it's major. Root up to the third, it's minor. Root up to the third, minor. Root up to the third, major. Root up to the third, minor. On occasion, you might intentionally sing the wrong answer just to determine for sure what the right answer was. Like I mentioned before, sometimes taking a vertical approach, listening from the root of the chord up the chord structure, is not practical. I offer instead this other possibility. Again, a lot of brain power is involved in this step. Let's consider once again the 2nd measure and the possibilities of E minor 7, C over E, or E7. If I think the possibility might be E7 on the second chord, I'm going to prepare to hear the sharp 5 of the key. Now my advantage here is I can prepare ahead of time with my question. I can get the sound of the key in my ear in the first measure, and there I might consider being on the 5th of the key, 5, and hold on to that sound in my ear until we come to the second measure to see if it moves up by half step to 5 sharp. Here's the 5th of the key in my ear. Let's try it. 5 sharp 5, and it lines up beautifully. This way I have plenty of time to prepare my question, and my ear is ready with the sound before the root of the chord occurs. For very fast-moving passages, I find this to be the most practical approach to take. Let's try this in the 5th measure as well, where we had the D7 to the G7 sus. Once again, I get the key in my ear, and I think that it's moving to D minor, but instead it moves to D7. Okay, let's get back to the key. I might sit on the 3rd of the key, mi, and see if it moves up by half step to fa, mi, fa. Oops, I don't think so. Let's try another approach. I always look for the easiest stepwise motion to get to my question note. So this time I think I'll go from the 5th degree of the key. So, and see if it goes down by half step. So, fi, and it lines up. This won't give you all your answers, but it does give you time to prepare ahead with a very specific question. Now that we have the answer, let's work out with the chord progression. For example, let's go back to considering the bass line and sing along with the chord progression. Remember, you can use numbers or you can use the movable do solfege system. 1, 2, 3, 3, 6, 5, 4, 3. Or we could go back and listen for what sounds in or out of the key. Sounds in the key, similar. Ah, that note sounds out of the key. Or we might practice singing from the root up to the 3rd of the chord, considering whether it's a major or minor 3rd. Root 3rd, major 3rd, root 3rd, minor 3rd, root minor 3rd, root major 3rd, root minor 3rd. We might consider as well what those thirds are in the key. For example, do, mi, major 3rd, staying in the key. Re, fa, minor 3rd, mi, so, minor third, mi, si, major third, etc. Let's take the last few chords and connect the thirds of the chord into a diatonic or not diatonic guide tone line. So we had mi, fa, so, si, la. Let's try it. Again, sometimes I have to get my brain settled first with the information before I put the ears to work. Mi, fa, so, si, la. Not all of you are pianists or guitarists. As melodic players, this linear guide tone approach might be more practical. Today's lesson offered a few suggestions of how to go about hearing the chord progression. You need lots of practice. Hearing the bass line, listening from the root to the third of the chord, determining its major or minor quality, hearing whether the chord is in or out of the key. These are just a few ways to get started hearing the chord progression. Remember, there's a lot of brain work that goes into this kind of listening experience. The answers just don't come to you miraculously. It's a lot of hard work and analytical listening. Use the theory you know as an introduction to hearing those same chord possibilities. Start simple. Start with 1-4-5 harmony for starters and get that down solid before you move to the next step. There's lots of music out there that represents the very theoretical items you've been learning about. In most cases, the theory came second. The examples in the real music came first. Try and get that theory in your ear. Have patience. It requires a lot of experience. But it's well worth the journey, because when you start to hear your way through the music, you'll find that your playing improves, your ability to improvise, to hear sounds without needing an instrument to represent those sounds. Reading will improve because you'll be hearing those sounds off the page. Again, remember to be organized. You can't hear everything at once. You can't determine your answers all at the same time. Good luck.
I can see what you mean, that it's a lifetime of work. It's a lot of work to do. If you're going to invest all that time in trying to hear changes, chord progressions, what are the benefits?
Well, I think that most musicians feel a greater sense of authenticity, that they can hear the music that they're creating. From my own personal experience, I felt that my brain was getting overloaded with all sorts of theoretical information, but I had little experience knowing how to apply that knowledge. Whether a student is composing or improvising, reading music, I think it empowers you to be able to hear the music, not just have a theoretical understanding.
So you gain confidence performing,
Absolutely.
doing all these things?
Absolutely.
Now, the method that we were listening to these changes, these chord progressions, were pretty abstract, meaning that in a block texture where you're playing them at a very slow rhythm. I guess the next would be listening to maybe some real music, not that your music isn't real, but music that you hear on recordings and whatever, and listening to them analytically. Do you have some activities or other suggestions of things that you can do to help improve hearing your changes?
I certainly do. I constantly remind my students that the listening approach one takes when they're trying to figure out what the changes are is not a very natural listening experience. That it involves a lot of analysis, a lot of picking apart the sound.
Do you think that you start enjoying music less by being analytical when you're listening to things?
I don't think so at all. I think that it only increases your involvement in understanding the music, and with that added confidence that you're building, I think it gives you a greater appreciation for what goes in to creating music.
Right. Can you ever go back to listening in a way where you just don't listen for the changes?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So it's good to do both, turn it on, turn it off.
That's right.
Great. Any other last tips or any words of wisdom?
I think as much as the student can take the knowledge they're learning and apply it to their own musical experiences, that's where it really clicks. For the beginning student, I highly recommend that they go through an exposure time of listening to examples and looking at the answer, taking it in. I recommend that students memorize tunes. I think that this is another way for them to internalize the sound of the chord progression. I highly recommend everybody learn a little piano if they don't play a chordal instrument.
I agree, that's very important.
Hands-on experience cannot be beat. Transcribing tunes from your own favorite repertoire. The motivation factor goes up 1,000%. And surprisingly, students discover how familiar those chord progressions are. They're all the same things they've been studying in their theory class. And it's a pleasant revelation when they discover that's not been for naught, that it actually applies out in the real music world.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been very helpful, and I think I'm going to go listen to some music and try to hear those changes.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Ba-dum-dum-ba-dum-dee, ba-ba-wee, ba-dum-dum.